snake biologist, a predator conservation biologist, and I'm really interested in how to sort of integrate nature and conservation, private landscapes all together. I have a colleague, Molly Cummings, also a biologist at UT Austin. She does a lot of things too, but she also is more deeply involved in turning Texas-sourced products into things we drink. So that's what we're going to talk to you about tonight. I'm going to start us out, talk a little bit about what the word wild means and how drinking bat-friendly mescal and gin sourced from Texas junipers can contribute to conservation and to all of us sort of living in the wild in the future. So I'll just talk for a little bit about that, and then I'm going to introduce Molly to you. She's going to be the main event tonight. She's going to make us some things to drink. And then when she finishes that part, I'll say just a little bit more about how we're going to bring jaguars back to Texas and why bats matter. And then I'm going to invite you to sip a little bat-friendly mescal. And I'll explain what bat-friendly mescal is just a little bit. I'm also going to invite you to buy some because they're in stock. So, what does this word wild mean? Maybe you've never thought about this, maybe you have. Maybe you think you know what it means. It turns out this is a very sort of significant point in conservation biology. So people actually argue about this. Traditionally, for environmentalists, especially in the United States, wild is viewed as a place that doesn't have people, or wildness as an attribute is about the absence of people. So U.S. environmentalists like to talk about wild and wilderness as untrammeled by people. They like to talk about wild creatures as being self-willed instead of being influenced by humans. Okay, so that's sort of the classic point. This is all sort of encapsulated in a common saying among environmentalists: take only photos, leave only footprints. Okay, so when you're in a wild place, you're not really part of it. You're a visitor. Okay. Now I grew up in that tradition as a nature lover, and I've changed my mind. Okay, now I don't have time tonight to talk about the things, the experiences that changed my mind, but I've changed my mind. I think that actually defining wild and wilderness as untrammeled and self-will treats us as spectators instead of participants. And I don't think that's actually realistic. Actually, I'll tell you a tiny thing. I started thinking about this the first time I was in Africa, and I realized you couldn't talk about Africa as being a wild place unless you went back before the origin of humans. So, what do I think? Well, ecology really as a science is about relationships among organisms, including us. So if we're here in Texas, it could be everything from beautiful spring flowers to longhorns to western diamondback rattlesnakes, which I study, and so forth. In fact, footprints have been around a lot longer than photos. Okay? Maybe you even know, if you know a little bit about human deep history, there are actually fossilized footprints about 3 million years old of the earliest Homo in East Africa, the earliest members of our lineage. Even here in the New World, people have been around for somewhere between 15 and 30,000 years. There's a lot of controversy about how long people have been here. They've certainly been in what we call Texas for a very long time. I'm especially fascinated by these people called the archaic Pecos, who lived several thousand years ago. There's a fantastic hall about the archaic Pecos at the Woody Museum in San Antonio. You know, you see these murals like this and you might think, oh, that's really cool, but how do they really know this, right? Well, it turns out we actually have what anthropologists call material culture items, like these rabbit catching nets. And they're actually shown in rock art. So this is an image of archaic Pecos people hunting rabbits with sticks, and they have their rabbit nets and so forth. So footprints way before photos. And what does this mean now in terms of how we think of wild? Well, I think it's what some indigenous thinkers like Robin Wall Kimmerer write about as eco-kinship. So this is a view of wildness and a people's place in the wild and in wilderness and so forth as being part of it all. And in this viewpoint, we're sort of kin with the rest of creation, and we are involved in reciprocal relationships. We take from nature, so we eat from nature, but we do this with respect and gratitude. We do it with moderation and reciprocity. And you might say, well, what kind of reciprocity? Well, it could be just a matter of respect, but also need to be about conserving the rest of nature. In terms of my goals, bringing jaguars back and so forth. So I just have one more slide before I turn this over to Molly. She can start making some stuff for you on the crane. This is a super interesting map. I'm really sorry the New York Times didn't manage to get it done in colors that are accessible to people with red and green colorblind problems. I find that kind of embarrassing. I apologize for that. But let me just tell you that the dark reddish colors in this map are places with an especially high biological diversity. Lots of species of plants and animals. And of course, here we are right here, right on the balconies that start at the front edge of the Texas Hill Country. Super high biodiversity. The green areas on this map are protected areas. And this distinction between protected areas and non-protected areas is what conservation biologists argue about as land sparing versus land sharing. Okay? So land sparing is when you take a chunk of land and to some extent or another you essentially control it. So people have very limited or no impact on the place. And land sharing is where you find ways to coexist. And to me, the most dramatic thing about this map is, look how little green there is in the whole middle of the United States. Okay? Those of us who care about nature, I think, have to own up to the fact that we've got to figure out land sharing. Land sparing is not going to get the job done. So you might think, oh, I came to this class because I wanted to drink some gin. I'm here because I want you to do that in the context of thinking harder about how we can coexist with nature. And I think the kinds of things Molly's doing, and the kinds of things that people in Mexico are doing, that I'm going to talk about briefly at the end, are part of advancing this notion of land sharing. So, I'm just kind of a ringmaster. I'm like the warm-up act. I'm like, I would think of some rock example, but you wouldn't recognize the people I'm talking about. So I want to introduce you to my colleague and friend, Molly Cummings. Molly got her PhD at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She's a world authority on visual signaling in animals, so that's her specialty. She teaches animal behavior and other classes at UT Austin. She studies visual signaling in her lab. And then she's got this whole other kind of Molly life now.
Side hustle. Side hustle. That's the official term.
You know, if I'd just known that, I wouldn't need to ask permission. It's side hustle.
That's right.
So please join me in welcoming Molly.
So I am hugely indebted to you for coming up with this. And I want you all to know that this is our first time. And if this goes really well, we're going to take it on the road. Yeah. So I want to go back a slide. I love this slide that Harry brought up. And I want you to pay attention as he brought our attention to the lack of green and red in various places. But I want you to go west of Austin, way out to West Texas, and you see this beautiful red blob with a little bit of green in the middle. That's where these gins are coming from, by the way. So hugely high biodiversity out there, and I'm going to get into it in a moment. Now, you've all been incredibly patient, and so we're going to start you off while I lather on with the first of our two wonderful gins from Wild Gins, called Wild Bark. And Sam is a Wild Gins man, and he's going to come around and pour you some of that. You should always have my gins and any other gins really on ice. So the way gins are constructed, all those botanicals are bound up, and then they open up on ice or really cool kind of water. So hopefully you've got some ice in your glass. If it's and if it's melted, it's certainly fine. It's the coolness that really opens up the gin. I'm going to go into the details about Wild Bark in a little bit, but I thought maybe you should just enjoy it while you hear kind of the back story. So actually, Harry did a good job of introducing me. Thank you so much. So here's me as my side hustle. And for those of you who have an iPhone, at some point we would love you to check out our website, wildgins.com. It's easy to fun. And at the end of this class, we're going to make you more cocktails, and I'm going to show you on the website how that happens. But then, as Harry was mentioning, my main day job, Monday through Friday, I do get a salary. And we're not quite rich enough. I did not go solo on this yet, so I still have to keep my day job. And my day job is I'm an evolutionary neuroecology scientist, biologist at the Department of Integrative Biology. Thank you, colleagues. I see 3 amazing women colleagues lined up in this row for showing up. And I study fish. So I often get confused for being a botanist because I started a gin company, but I'm really more of an ichthyologist. But you know, fish are fun, and so is gin, so there is it. Okay, so I want to introduce you to our company first, and then gin, and then the rest of the good stuff. So really quick, we've got kind of 3 important things you should know about us. We're the only gins in the world with unique Texas junipers, and you're going to learn why this is incredibly unique in a moment. And myself and friends and family, we hand forge them in West Texas. Every other gin on the shelf here at Total Wine features the common juniper, which comes out of Europe, and you're actually going to see that distribution. And very excitingly, we're the world's first single origin gin. You've probably never heard that term because we kind of coined it because we were the first ones. What that all means. But first, a little history of our company. In 2019, we launched Wild Gins, and then we found out that our recipe, because we had the alligator juniper that you're about to try in Wild Bark, along with the red berry juniper, which you're going to have with Wild June a little later, had never been in any commercial food or beverage in the history of the United States. What that meant is the FDA was like, hello, you need approval. And so that took it nearly a year to get approval. And I relied on things like going to the literature, and indigenous peoples actually consumed red berry and alligator juniper and used it for both medicinal and food products. So that helped my FDA case. We also did third-party chemical analyses to make sure there was nothing toxic in our junipers. There wasn't, and in fact, all these wonderful terpenoids, which are these wonderful antioxidants are in there, so you can like feel good about it. Okay, so then 2020 came around, I'm like, great, we're approved, let's go, let's launch. We launched a week before COVID. Oh. Now, a lot of people, when I tell them that, like, oh, but everyone was drinking during COVID. I'm like, yeah, they knew what we were, they would drink us. So you could, I don't know if you recall this, but you couldn't come into these stores, right? And you had to order online and we couldn't do any tastings in stores. And that's how you really introduce people to your product when you're starting a spirit. So what I ended up having to do was come up with my COVID project. You know, we all had COVID projects because we were stuck at home. Here I had this gin company, I had a lot of junipers, I had a lot of alcohol, and I had a lot of time. I started reading because we're all kind of, if you're here, you're geeky. So thank you for joining the choir of geeks here. And I was reading a lot about junipers and their medicinal qualities. And it ends up that junipers have 2 medicinal qualities that are antiviral, specifically viruses that hang out in the lungs. And I'm like, haha. So I created this extraction, and the way you access these antiviral compounds is you need to extract them over a long period of time. So you're gonna get a minor hint of this when you have my gin, but because I had COVID time on my hands, I extracted for a much longer period of time. And oh, the sweetness came out. And then I also extracted out of lemon balm, which is another botanical in our wild June. And I put it together, and we called it the Wild LBJ, you know, like, hello, Texas people. And we gave it kind of a presidential seal and look. And so this is how we kind of tried to advertise ourselves in those dark days of COVID, is we gave away free samples around our neck hangers. And so we're like, hey, come try us. And so we were giving away free antiviral compounds. Of course, I couldn't say that. Then the FDA would slap me again. But, you know, You could have felt good, killing COVID with every sip. Okay, so that's what we did in 2020. 2021, we simply survived. 2022, things started to get kind of interesting. We started to get some more attention. I'm so proud of this. Sorry, the text is really small. But you know the Austin Chronicle Best Of series? We were finalists and for the best local alcoholic beverage brand, and we were up against Tito's, we were up against Still Austin, we were up against all these people with multi-million-dollar marketing budgets. And here we are. Every scientist knows that, we know how to take like a penny and make it go really far. And that's kind of like my gin company, and we're really lean and mean. Anyhow, super proud of that. That year Tito's won. What are you gonna do when you're up against Tito's? But anyhow, I decided it was really important as a gin company that really highlights, and the star of the show are these unique Texas junipers. We needed to give back to that land. So we started this Giving Back to the Land campaign that we call Give a Wild Buck campaign, where we give $1 for every bottle sold of wild gins through the giving season, which I call November through February. And so, not now, but you'll start to see these little net hangers starting in November on our bottles, and then game on. And you can start giving back to the land yourself by buying our gin, because we give to the Nature Conservancy and we earmark it for the West Texas chapter. Jeff Weigel, who is like the director of strategy for the Nature Conservancy, reached out to me just after past year's check. He's like, "Thank you, this is awesome." And I'm like, "Thank you." So anyhow, this is one effort towards sparing that we do, and we also do some sharing, because the only way I could do this foraging is on private lands. So in the last couple of years, we've been expanding our markets. I want to let you know that we're now online. So when it comes to the gift buying season, if you practice Christmas or Hanukkah or anything where you give gifts, you can go online and you can ship our bottles anywhere in the United States. So if you want to give someone a truly Texas gift for the holiday season, please consider us. Also, I just wanted to give a shout out, if any of you are female bartenders. We started something this past year, being one of the few female-owned spirits company. We have a female-only cocktail competition called Wild Women Make Wild Drinks, and we launched it in last March. It was a huge, fun success. And I want to do it at least three major metropolitan areas in Texas this coming March. And I wanted to also, how many of you have seen Texas Country Reporter? Okay, well, they have a new season coming out with a new host, and we're being featured on an episode, and I can't tell you which episode it is yet. I mean, I don't know, I would share it with you, obviously. But it's going to be fun, and so if you happen to see that, please do watch it. So I am trying to, whoa, it went way fast. Okay, so you are now trying Wild Bark. It features the alligator juniper. This is a glimpse of where I forage out in the Davis Mountains. How many of you have been to the Davis Mountains? Great, that's about, you're a little over a third. How many of you have never heard of the Davis Mountains? Don't be shy. I actually had not heard of the Davis Mountains until my colleague, a biologist, heard that I was looking for the alligator juniper. Because, if you're going to start with Texas junipers, why not start with the alligator juniper? That's just too enticing not to go for. And he's like, "Oh, I know where the alligator juniper is. It's out in Fort Davis." So anyhow, he kind of led me there. But you're starting with Wild Bark. And I want to step back a bit and talk about gin and really give you a picture as to how unique this beverage you're trying right now is. So if you go to Wikipedia, you pull up gin, you kind of get this whole thing, right? It's a distilled alcoholic drink. The main ingredient has to be juniper berries. That's key. If you've got a vodka with a bunch of different botanicals and there's no juniper in it, it's just an infused vodka. if you take that vodka and you infuse it with a whole bunch of botanicals, including juniper, it is now a gin. So those are some of the differences. It started off in the Netherlands. In fact, the reason why we call it gin is because Genever is Dutch essentially for juniper. So it's truly tied to juniper. But it became famous to most English-speaking countries because the Brits went a little crazy about it a couple hundred years ago. When drinking gin was safer than drinking the local water because they hadn't figured out sewer systems and that sort of thing. So we were doing, again, gin was medicinal. I mean, for not great reasons, but yes. I want to point out that, how many of you are gin and tonic fans? Okay, I'm actually not, which is kind of surprising, right? Because I have a gin company. But I want to point out there's so many great ways to have gin, and you're going to have a couple of them tonight towards the end. There's so many wonderful ways. How many of you know the history of the gin and tonic? Yes, go ahead, share.
It's like anti-malarial?
Yes, so the British soldiers were building a bridge, I believe in India, and they had to take tonic, daily dose of tonic, because it had quinine, and that has anti-malarial properties. So the British soldiers added gin to make the tonic taste better, not the other way around. Unfortunately, everyone thinks it's the other way around, and it's not. So if you really want, I mean, how many of you enjoyed that nice sip of wild bark just tonic? Isn't he lovely? By the way, I don't know if this is PC or not, but I have pronouns for my gins, and you just had my masculine gin, because he's my like James Bond. When you see my labels, you might notice this is, okay, I'm a little off topic here, what the heck, this is our first time, we're just going for it, we're bringing in. So this is a coyote. So the name of wild bark, or we gave it the name wild bark because there's an alternative name to the alligator juniper known as the checker bark, and you're going to see images of it. It's because of its bark is very checkered. And so we decided to keep everything wild, so we're like wild bark, and then we decided to go double entendre and make it a canine and send it like cute dogs that also would have been looking really good on here. We went with the only wild canine in Texas, which is the coyote. I do not take any offense if you mistake this for a wolf, because it's a handsome looking creature. But anyhow, what I want to point out, besides all of that, is that when you turn these bottles on the inside, he's winking at you. And this was my idea. Okay, I might be a biologist for days, but man, I did a pretty good job. All right, so the other thing I want to point out here is juniper berries. So as I mentioned before, every other gin on that whole aisle has the same exact species of juniper in it. The common juniper, or Juniperus communis. It is circumnavigates the northern hemisphere, basically. So this is all of Europe. Boom. Remember, gin originated around here, went crazy over there. Everyone's got the same juniper. Everyone uses the same juniper. There are thousands of gins in the world, and they're all using that. Notice it goes all the way into Russia. If you look into North America, you can see it's more of a northern, but it goes across North America in the north. Okay, I mentioned that to make a gin, you can kind of start with the vodka. I want to point out the difference between vodka and gin. Vodka is essentially a neutral grain spirit, grain GNS. It's supposed to be flavorless. Have you noticed? Yeah, it is flavorless. Okay, so the neat thing about gin is we basically start with the vodka, and then we redistill it with interesting things like botanicals to make it more interesting. So if you want to take gin then and make that more interesting, then you make it out of Texas junipers. So that's what we did. So we're the only gin with native Texas junipers and world's first single origin, which I'll get to. But I want to point out this red berry juniper, that is a juniper. So what is a typical common juniper color? Blue. Yeah. So when I was foraging for the alligator juniper, I saw this tree, and at this point, I'm like literally traveling around with about 8 tree books, and I saw this tree. I'm like, wow, it's got all these features that are juniper-esque. The berries are red. Like, what the heck's going on? So I'm like keying this thing out. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a red berry juniper, and it's only found in Texas. Yo! So anyhow, you're gonna try that next. But I really want to tell a full circle story and give credit to this book and this man. So this is the book that made it possible for me to really find and really identify the junipers that are in my gins. And what's really neat is this man, Dr. Robert Adams, who is the juniper expert in the world. He did his PhD at UT Austin about 55-ish, 6-ish years ago. And then he became a professor at Baylor, and he truly is the juniper expert. You don't write an entire book on a genus of plants without being the expert. Kind of seems like he had a fun life, though. I know this book pretty well, and about 1/3 of the photos are, I'm in China, next to this one, I'm in Mexico, next to that one. So anyhow, and then of course, then we're bringing it full circle that I came across this various things in this book, and now I'm trying to really create the Texas gin by featuring uniquely Texas junipers. So it's not a coincidence that Dr. Robert Adams became the juniper expert coming out of UT. And that's because Texas has, as I had mentioned before, the greatest biodiversity of junipers in all of the United States. Anyone, and Nicole is not allowed to answer this. Did I mention the number we have? I didn't. Any guesses how many species of juniper? I just showed you the distribution across Europe, the common. They only have a couple. Any guesses how many junipers we have in our fair state?
120.
What's that?
120.
That's more juniper species than there are in the world. But thank you. We have 8, and that's great. And it's also, it surpasses California, it surpasses every other state that I'm aware of. And I really want to highlight this wonderful human being over there behind the camera, Nicole Elmore, and she wrote this as part of the UT's Biodiversity Center. She wrote this great little article a few years ago about the Texas junipers and what I was kind of doing with them. So thank you, Nicole, for putting us on the map. And what I want to do now is introduce you to these 8 junipers. So the one that you already are intimately aware of is Juniperus ashii, or ash juniper. We also call it mountain cedar. Cedars and junipers are in the same family, so that's how they kind of get given this name. How many of you are allergic to mountain cedar? Yeah, don't worry. It is not in our gin. In fact, being a true scientist, I explored and investigated and experimented with 5 of the 8 Texas junipers. And when I sent this one, I'm not a distiller, I hire experts. So when I sent this one to my master distiller, I said, Molly, don't you ever send that juniper to me again. That makes a horrid gin. So I'm just saving you the trouble. If you're like, oh, I'm inspired to do bathtub gin with my backyard juniper, don't make your Austin backyard juniper. It's really not good. Kind of nearby, and this one I had never heard of, is the oval gland juniper. It's a lot like, it looks a lot like the ashii. It's in the New Braunfels area. In fact, I pulled these distribution maps from this book. So this is where ashii is. See, it's in central Texas. Ovada is off by kind of San Antonio area. Notice, remember, I'm forging way out here. No ash juniper is going to any of our gins. Okay. So we've got these 2, and then we've also got the eastern red cedar. That's more on the eastern side of the state. We have, now we get into some ones you may not have heard of. They're kind of, I think they're pretty cool. The one-seeded juniper, it's off in West Texas in the Panhandle. Juniper esqualensis, the rose-fruited juniper. Someday I might make like a specialty season gin out of that beautiful one. This is one of our stars. This is Juniper's pinchati, the red-berry juniper. You're going to see more of her and drink some of her. And then the one you have just had a sip of is Juniper steppiana, the alligator or the checker bark juniper. And then the last one is just, there's a little bit of the state that has the weeping juniper, and that's in Big Bend. And I went on a hunt once to go see her, and I missed her. But Big Bend is a big place, so I still get to go back. I want to point out something really, really cool. These 4 species are all found in one county that I forage in. So think of England, well, Great Britain, Ireland and England and Scotland. They have one species, and in one little county in West Texas, we have 4. So anyhow, so I love this little county, and I think one of the reasons why it's amazing. Oh, this might work. Well, okay, so this is from the Nature Conservancy. They did this beautiful piece. It's 5 minutes long, and I want to play it now, but maybe we'll play it at the end when we're mingling and that sort of thing. But it talks about how the Davis Mountains are a sky island in Texas. So these are volcanic rock area, different kind of soil type, different kind of climate. And then you go down to these flatlands. So any species that have evolved to coexist with these kind of environmental conditions, they're kind of uniquely there, and they're isolated. So they're these island communities of species. And that's what we have going on with our gins. And I also think that the reason why our junipers out west taste so much better than here is because of the more intense climate. So those of you who are winos, or wine-friendly people, you may know that the grapes that live in the kind of harsh conditions, they taste really good. So those vines are putting all their resources and they're focusing them in. And my gals, because it's only female trees that produce berries. I'm getting geeky here. Okay, it's not actually a berry. We call them a juniper berry, but it's a cone. It's just easier to call them a berry, and it doesn't look like the kind of conifer cone we're used to. But anyways, those female trees, they take up to 2 years to produce mature berries. So over that whole period of time, they're kind of saving up their resources, and then when it's ready to go for it, they go gangbusters. I can get, like, if I really, and I never do this, if I were to take every berry from a big old alligator juniper tree, I might be able to get close to 100 pounds. I would never do that to my gals, but I can get tens of pounds of berries, no problem. And that can go a long way. But you can find it on YouTube. You could just do Davis Mountains Preserve YouTube, and this is a great video that describes how precious the Davis Mountains is. Okay, so you've been enjoying wild bark, and what I want to do is, while I'm kind of transitioning and talking about wild bark, is I want to pass these babies around. You might need a little bit more. Sam, is there more? Yeah. And I want to introduce you to simple ways to have my gins. And so, how many of you like mules? If you don't like a mule, don't have this. But so this is super simple. It's just ginger beer, and I'm a snob when it comes to mixers. Fever Tree is the best. So we're letting you do the mixing because you might want a lot, you might want a little. But this is one of my favorite ways to have wild bark. It's you can go ahead and pour away. I don't think you're allowed. Are they allowed?
They can pour from mixers.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, well, Big Brother's not watching. They're not in here, but yeah. So I love this. This is one of my favorite. It makes the best mule I've ever had. You know I'm biased, but that's how I feel about it. No, it's the same one. It's the same one. Yeah, it's the same one. So I just want you to, and, okay, I'll be legit, I am a professor, I should follow the rules. Okay. Anyhow, so the alligator juniper, where I collect her is in these Davis Mountains, and she is the matriarch of the Davis Mountains. Like, this is from a drone footage. If you go to our website, you'll see the drone video over the Davis Mountains. And I would say about 50% of the trees that you're looking at are alligator juniper. So I really go to the epicenter of this beautiful tree species. She can get big and tall. This isn't particularly a big tree. They've gotten to be 60 feet, and they should be as girthy as 50 feet wide. Just tremendous. This is actually from last weekend. This is my good friend from college's daughter, Annalisa, and she got to name this tree. So this tree is Anna Luscious. And that batch might come out in a little bit. But just to show you the distribution of the alligator juniper, you can see she really only starts showing up way out west. This is the Davis Mountains area. Then she and these are the Guadalupe Mountains. Then she bleeds in to New Mexico at little pockets in New Mexico and Arizona. There's lots of varieties of the alligator juniper, and this is the specific variety we have. I think it's highly likely, these are essentially island pockets of this variety. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if the species that we forage from tastes very different than the one in New Mexico, as well as the ones up in Arizona. This species needs to be at altitude, so around 5,000 feet is kind of when you start seeing the alligator juniper. So we're about to, after we enjoy this meal, how many of you have had a sip? Isn't that lovely? Okay. I just think it's the best meal going. I forget the lime. Like with this, you don't need a lime. Think about why vodka drinks have to add things like lime, because they're tasteless, right? So they're like, oh, we'll hide the fact that we're adding nothing to this drink by adding a lime. So with our gins, you don't need a lime. You just let it kind of shine with some ginger beer. So you might have noticed that the bottle of what you see up here is different than what you see right here. This is introducing our new label. If you guys, when you're done with this class, go and buy every bottle on that shelf because they have the old labels. The next time you come, you might see the new label. So just an incentive. I think it's pretty darn gorgeous. But I want to show you just how truly unique the red berry juniper is. So the red berry juniper, Universe Conchati, this is her distribution, she kind of thing. And this is where I forage for the red berry juniper. And so you can see she's kind of a panhandle thing and a West Texas thing. She's a pinky in New Mexico and a pinky in Oklahoma, but she is our Texas star.
That's a J.
What's that?
It's a J shape.
Yes, she sounds like a gem, but she doesn't. She's not. She is my gem, but it starts with a J. She's just absolutely gorgeous, and she's juicy and sweet, and so completely edible. All the animals. I know I'm in red berry juniper country because I'll see scat with just tons of that in there. So she's a lovely thing. And she's completely different. So when we, what I'd like to do, I guess I didn't, working on the timing, we're going to save the other glass for the mescal. So we also don't want you to get too drunk. And you can always have, at the end of our presentation, if you're like, I wanted more of that meal, we can make you more of that meal, okay? So what we ask of you now is to turn over the blue cup, and that's your waste bucket cup. And what we're going to do, again, I didn't give you much time to enjoy that meal, but waste nothing. Well, there is that. Here's a thought. Well, again, we're weighing this. So because what I'm gonna do is pass out your cocktail cup. And so if you want to keep more of that mule, you know, you can pour it into this kind of thing. If you're like, I don't really like this mule, then you can just pour it into your blue cup. Does that make sense? That way you can kind of save the mule while you're trying everything else. And now what we're going to do is Sam's going to come around and put more ice in your other cup, along with giving you a taste of Wild June, which features the red berry juice.
So Molly,
Yes,
how much berry do you need to meet your production needs?
there you go. So I can't tell you my exact recipe, great secret, but not that much, which is awesome. So people often say, well, I'll back up. I used to call myself, my goal is to be the Tito's of gin. And people are like, well, how are you going to scale up that way? I'm like, well, because juniper berry is actually just the flavoring on top. It's not the main spirit. So it's not part of that neutral base, the grain neutral spirit base. So most of the alcohol in there, we start actually, thank you, Kelly. I'm going to back up and get to your answer. So when we, a whole bunch of the British gins out there, their base spirit is corn ethanol, okay? And for me, when I have a typical English gin, for me, it can be really harsh. You know, I don't know, it's like I'll drink a bit and then whoo, kind of thing. And I think that's the corn ethanol effect. Our base is 80% rye, 20% malted barley, so it's very smooth. Kind of. My brothers, I have a big Irish Catholic family, and my brothers wanted to lay it down for whiskey, hence we've got kind of a whiskey base. Anyhow, so we start with that, and then we add the botanicals, and we infuse it overnight, and then we redistill. So it's not that much per which is wonderful for us, and we can get a lot. So to answer your question, so if I get 10 pounds of juniper berries, that can translate into a couple thousands of bottles.
Wow.
Yeah. I know. Great ratios, and because I often have lots of volunteers to help me forage, it's like, I'm ready for you, Tito's. I'm ready to give it to us. And it took a lot of experimentation to figure out how to preserve the juniper without, actually there's a good photo, let's see. I wanted to show you something. Maybe I'll show it, well, okay. So, how many of you know what a bloom is on a berry or a bloom on any kind of fruit? I clearly am not totally prepped for this question, but I'm trying to find an image where I can show you a bloom. Okay, wait, maybe here. Okay, so this is a good image. All right, so do you see these juniper berries? These are the alligator juniper berries, and they kind of look a little white, don't they? Like minty white, minty green. There's a whiteness on there, and it's a very thin yeast film, and that's the bloom. And that yeast is kind of feeding off the sugars that are coming from the berry. And so this thing has a bloom, and I found out the hard way, you don't want to like store your junipers without removing that bloom. I once did a 10-day excursion all the way to New Mexico, and I was like foraging all the way around, keeping all these berries in brown paper bags. Got home to Austin on my back porch, opened up some of these things, and pulled it out, and it had the white, like, yeasty mat. I'm like, ooh, gross. And I like, threw it into the wild food next to my house. I really do. Someone who's been in my house can vouch. I live at the end of a dead end street, so this was not. But anyways, 6 hours later, I had hives. Oh, yeah. Because I'm very mold sensitive, and so you can trust me. I went through like, oh my, can't let that happen again. So now I do a very clean process. I'm also very chemical phobic, so you're not getting any of this chemical stuff. I clean off that bloom, and then I dehydrate them and vacuum seal them. So when I send them off to the distiller, it's just pure juniper essence, pure juniper, and none of that other stuff. And that's the other reason why I'm ready to scale, because when I do it through this process, they can be good for years, which is great. So I can go through high years and low years. And the drought that's been hitting Texas has definitely hit West Texas. Like, I've noticed some of my gals who are usually, so I have odd year gals and even year gals, because they, take 2 years for when they mature. And what I noticed, some of those gals were like, we're on a reproductive strike because it's too dry. Thankfully, not everyone goes on strike, and they don't need hundreds of trees. I mean, yeah.
Does the age of the tree make a difference in the?
That's a great question. These trees can grow up to 200 years old. And so this gal here, she's actually, this is one tree kind of split into two at the trunk, at the base. She's probably 100 to 150. There are some big, gorgeous gals up there with like super wide trunks. But I've seen even young ones, young things with berries. So I don't know the answer, but I do feel as if across, 10 years to 150 to 200. And I've seen ones who are clearly near the end, and they're still producing berries. It's super wonderful. Good idea. Okay, so, all right, so here's the red berry juniper. He's really the star of Texas. And what I want to point out, if you haven't noticed, if you haven't seen our bottles, is that we're single origin gin, and I promise that, we're doing, if you want now, you can add something simple to Miss June. How many of you tasted her and noticed she's really different? Isn't she completely different than me? I love the fact that I have two gins with such different personalities. And so I like simple mixers, just to add a little bit of fruit to her, and she blossoms. So yeah, so we're passing that around. But we call ourselves single origin because you know how I mentioned that Annalisa came out, she helped me forage, and we named that tree Analuscious. Well, when we do distillations, we do all the berries from a single tree because I name all my beloved trees. We put the name of that tree on our side label. So this was Birdie, this is Starchild, this was from near the McDonald's Observatory. This is Lovely Lane, named after a granddaughter of one of the ranchers. I have to, getting back to the sharing idea, I can't forage on public lands. So the first time I saw an alligator juniper, it was in Davis Mountain State Park, but I'm not allowed to forage there. So I have this wonderful eclectic group of mountain friends, and they, even if they're Baptists, and if you know Baptists, they can't drink, they're like, sure, Mom, you want to forage on our land for junipers? I've become their crazy Austin biology professor person that they have adopted, and they let me come and forage, and it's wonderful. Two of which are co-owners in the company, and someday when we're wildly famous and start making money, I'm going to start paying these people. But we have access to hundreds of trees. At some point when I have more time, like not trying to juggle two jobs, I'm going to make cute little name tags for my trees and put them on there. So when you're driving around the Davis Mountains, you can see them. Yeah, so those are our two beautiful gins, and truly Texas, hyper Texas terroir. If you think of terroir as being kind of like a local, from the land. If we're doing Baptist from a single tree, we call that hyper terroir, and incredibly uniquely Texan. So we're going to switch to mescal. But I wanted to point out, when you get on your phones and go to Wild Gins, this is going to be the landing page. Certainly, if you ever want to do the online or figure out where to buy them, you can click on that. But later on, we can click on how to drink, and you can come up with all sorts of really fun, I'm gonna borrow this, simple cocktails. I wanna point out that we left you a tech sheet. The front tells you all the nitty-gritty geeky details of what's in our gins. The back are some of my favorite super simple cocktails. I believe that everyone should be able to make a fun and very scrumptious cocktail at home, and you don't need to add a lot of fancy, expensive ingredients to make a great tasty. Yes?
Before you move on, I have 2 questions.
Oh, please.
What, have you ever considered trying to make a vaccine for
No.
local juniper? Second, an anti-allergen. And second, is the bloom, would that apply to a tomatillo? That little green papery thin
Oh,
stuff?
the paper thin thing is not a bloom.
Okay.
The papery thing, I'm not a botanist, so I don't know the term, but I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
I don't know the technical term. So no, the bloom, so when I have those kind of minty green ones, if you find one like that, if you just start rubbing it, it goes away, and then it becomes bright green below. And by the way, it took a lot of our research and development to determine the exact ripeness at which time to forage. And these are just before they're super ripe. And that was like top secret information, people. So we're gonna, at the end, you've had a wild barking mule to start with, and we're gonna have some of these two after you have some mescal. All right, Harry, back to you.
Good, thanks, Molly. So let me just riff just a little bit more on this business of wildness and on making Texas wilder. I mean, and so I want to tell you that as somebody who studied predators their whole professional life, my stretch goal for Texas, would be like emblematic of Rewilding Texas, is to get jaguars back here. So maybe you don't know about jaguars in Texas, but the jaguar used to be a very widely distributed large cat in the western part of North America, southwestern part of North America. A lot of controversy about it right now in Arizona and New Mexico. Our last known jaguar in Texas was killed in 1948. That's a picture of him right there. It was just south of San Antonio. He was, quote, this is based on the field notes of the biologist who examined him, fat as butter with raccoon in his stomach. Now there are just all kinds of things I could spend a whole hour talking to you about jaguars and jaguar conservation and raccoons and what a problem they are for us here in Texas today in terms of conserving biodiversity. I don't have time for that, but this would be like my stretch goal, is to get these jaguars here in Tamaulipas and León and so forth coming back into our state and coexisting with ranching. And just to show you how this all gets more and more complicated, how in the world would ranchers put up with jaguars, right? Well, it turns out if you leave the horns on the cattle, things go a lot better. Okay? So then you start asking, this is how stretch goal works. You start asking, well, why don't we leave our horns on cattle? And it turns out there's a reason. I don't think it's a very good reason. And I think we could do better and leave horns on cattle. We have longhorns, and we know that for longhorns, their horns are like your hands. It's incredible if you watch longhorns to see what they do with their horns all the time. So there's a lot of reasons why I want to see longhorns everywhere, not these polled black cattle and polled Herefords, and I want to see jaguars back in Texas. And it's within that sort of framework that I think what Molly's doing is so important, because what we really like to do is be sourcing as much of everything that we eat and drink from more local, regionalized sources and doing it in a nature-friendly way. So I had to talk just a little bit about jaguars. Now, I want to just say a couple more things about wildness. I sort of think of wildness as almost like concentric circles. And so the most wild you could be would be a place where you could have bears and pumas and jaguars and Mexican wolves even back in Texas. You know, that would be like ultimate wildness. And you go out from that into maybe like ranch lands or places where they have a sheep operation and you can't tolerate any predators there, but it's still pretty wild. You could go all the way from that to downtown Austin, where we still have peregrine falcons, where we have hundreds of thousands of ring-tailed bats, where we have all this botanical diversity. So even in a big urban environment, you can have wildness. So here's Texas, and here's Caprock Canyon State Park, and that's a pretty wild place. When you're out there among bison and prairie dogs and stuff, I think you have more of a sense of wildness. But we can have it in cities too. This is actually in New York City, but it involves something that they call the Manhattan Healing Forest, which are these small patches of vegetation within, one of the biggest cities in the world. These are our Texas Tower peregrines. The camera isn't working right now. I think that's right, Nicole, because of the renovation.
They're doing some reconstruction in the area.
Yeah, but we hope it'll be back in 2026. I think that's our hope, that we'll be back watching our peregrines again. So I would argue that the UT campus is wilder for having peregrine falcons swooping down and catching pigeons and all that. So that's my notion of wildness, is that it varies a lot. And that brings us to bats. So I want to say a little bit about mescals. Tequila is one kind of mescal. So mescals are made from agave plants. The way mescal is made, just put very simply, I know a lot less about this than Molly does, but basically you take this wonderful agave plant, like century plants here, you know what an agave looks like, and you chop it out the heart of it, and then you roast it, and then you mash it, and then you distill it, and somehow you end up with this juice that you make into mescal or even tequila. And there are literally dozens of species of agaves used in making mescal. Only one of them makes what can be called tequila. So I'm just going to talk about mescal in general, but tequila is a type of mescal. I brought a couple of props. I think this is so cool. Somebody gave me this recently. This was purchased by a U.S. Marine several decades ago in Tijuana. And the Marine is a friend of mine, and the Marine bought 2 bottles of this Gusano Rojo, the red worm, and there is a worm in the bottle. He bought 2 bottles, and he drank one of them, and he never drank alcohol again. So kind of this is a surprise. And it's almost like, an object for contemplation. Like, would I ever drink this? Would it be risky? Or is it just something to contemplate? But isn't that cool? You have to, after we check out this bottle, it's just the red worm here, carrying her. Anyway, it's fantastic. So it turns out that as mezcals, including tequila, have become more and more popular, especially over the last couple of decades, it's become more and more an industrialized production, such that there are these enormous plantations of agaves that are harvested, cloned, and mostly not allowed to reproduce and do not feed the things that normally pollinate them. So in the case of agaves, a major pollinator is bats. And there are even these particular bats that have specialized snouts and really long tongues that are nectar foraging bats. So this situation arose in which we have larger and larger expanses in Mexico with these enormous monocultures of agaves that are all being harvested before they ever flower, and thereby not A, feeding the bats, and B, breeding themselves, cross-pollinating, maintaining genetic diversity, and so forth. So there's a very famous bat biologist at the National University of Mexico in Mexico City named Rodrigo Medellin, and the way I got interested in this is I heard him give a talk. So I'm not an expert on mezcal or bats. I'm a snake biologist, carnivore biologist, longhorn rancher. But I was just so fascinated by this story. And so what happened is Rodrigo Medellin convinced a particular family in Michoacan to start letting 5% of their agaves flower. And in return for that, they get bat-friendly certified. And so they get this little hologram on the bottom, certified bat-friendly, because they have agreed to let 5% of the agave plants on all their production lands flower, so that the bats get to feed, the plants get to crossbreed, and that's the deal, right? So when I heard this talk and saw this picture in his talk, this says, let's toast with bat-friendly tequila. I thought, well, this is so cool. I want to try this stuff. You know, I've actually spent the last 30 years drinking almost nothing but really good big red wines like Tannats and Cabernets and so forth. Not really a hard liquor fan at all. And I got a bottle of this. And this stuff is really good. I mean, you can either drink it just neat, as they say, you know, in the glass. I like it on a cube of ice myself. You could make margaritas and other drinks out of it. So when I first found out about this, there was a list of where you could buy this Don Mateo back-friendly mescal. And there were only 3 stores in Austin. They're from a chain. I guess I shouldn't say this since we're here. It was frustrating because I would go to these stores and sometimes they'd have it, sometimes they wouldn't. I finally got an email communication with the owner of the chain. Please, can you get the stock? Well, we don't have demand. I'm going, well, there's not much demand because you don't keep it in stock and you haven't advertised all these lovely Central Texas, great, you know, Austin, Weird, etc. people that they could be drinking that friendly mescal. I just didn't succeed with them. And one day I was in here in this store buying a bottle of her gin.
Do as he does.
I was in this store because it's right next to PetSmart where we buy food for our dog and our snake. This is how it happens, you know? So I just have a chance run-in with the guy at the service counter. I go, hey man, you have anything to do with like what's sold there? He goes, yeah, why are you asking? I go, well, you ever heard of bat-friendly mescal? It turns out the guy's kind of a nature nerd. He got all excited about it. And now they're stocking it. And they're selling it substantially cheaper than the other chain.
This is your claim.
As far as I know, I'm telling you this because I want you to all go out here and be ambassadors for bat-friendly mescal. As far as I know, this is the only Total Wine store that's selling Don Mateo Cupriata bat-friendly mescal with a little hole right there. So let me just tell you a little bit more about it. I just want to show you a couple really cool pictures and we'll stop. So this is how new we are at this. This bottle, I stole this bottle off the shelf.
You're making me nervous.
They didn't tell us how to do it. Right? So here's why this matters. Here's why this matters. So this is an example of what we biologists call a mutualism. And mutualisms are extremely widespread in nature. You could almost say that mutualisms are sort of what makes nature work. They're relationships among species. And one of the kinds of mutualisms is pollination. Pollination works because the plant pays a pollinator to basically, the plant pays a pollinator so it can have sex. Okay? Now, maybe most of you are in on this. Did you know that flowers are the way that plants have sex? Okay, I think that's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, they're so pretty and so enjoyable that actually that's plants having sex. It's just, what if they can talk, you know? You see all those blue bonnets and they're out there and they're actually having sex, right? So, that's because they have little male parts and little female parts. In some kinds of flower plants, they have only males, only females, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes they can self-pollinate, sometimes they can't. But here's the cool thing. With certain bats that are nectar feeders or specialized, the plants provide nectar to lure the bats in, for the bats to stick their snouts in the sexual parts of the plant and then transfer the gametes. Okay? So I'm going to show you 2 slides. Look at this tongue coming in here, going to lick the nectar. And here's what it's going to lead with. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that beautiful? I mean, just think about it. I mean, so, isn't this amazing? I knew the guy, another guy who took these pictures, and I knew that Randy had these incredible slides, so I gave him the reasons. So, why would we want to care about bats? I want to just say a little bit more about bats, and then we'll stop. Of course, one reason might be we just think bats are so damn cool, which is what some of us feel. Like, I don't actually need any other reasons to like bats. Bats are incredibly diverse, and you may know that there are over 1,000 species of bats. There are more than 100 species of bats in some tropical localities. So if you went to certain rainforest localities in Costa Rica, there are 100 species of bats in one place. And they do all kinds of crazy things. There are bats that swoop down and catch fish. There are bats that eat fruit, blah, blah, blah. Well, there are also practical reasons to care about bats. And of all the amazing things, this paper just came out in Science on Thursday. So this is like, you were among the first people in Austin to know about this paper, because I just found out about it last night. It turns out that this team of people headed by this person, whose last name is Frank, did a huge analysis across a bunch of counties in the U.S. of expansion of the white-nosed fungus, which is killing bats, diminishing populations of bats, diminished bat predation on diverse insects, increased insecticide use, and it turns out there's actually at least a correlation with increased infant mortality in the United States. Probably because of the increased pesticide use. The increased pesticide use is because of increases in insects, particular insects, that are released from the pressure of predation by bats. Okay? And the bats are gone because of the fungus. And the fungus, we don't understand very well, but you may know that there's an amphibian-killing fungus, there's a snake-killing fungus, there's a bat-killing fungus. We're in the middle of trying to figure out what's going on with all these emerging diseases. What this paper shows is we can't escape all this, you know. We're all part of the whole thing. It's all matter. Okay, so that's my spiel. Isn't it crazy that we could live in a city, the capital of Texas, where tourists actually go down the bridge and watch our bats fly out? Maybe you don't, I look out, most of you are too young to know this, but there was actually a time when the city of Austin regarded those bats as pests. Am I right now? And there was talk about how to eradicate the bats under that bridge. And some really interesting things happened. A guy named Merlin Tuttle started Bat Conservation International here in Austin. And a woman named Diane Ackerman wrote an article about Merlin Tuttle and the Congress Avenue Bridge bats. It was either in the New Yorker or I think it was in the New Yorker. And membership in Bat Conservation International shot up in 1 month. The bats under the Congress Street Bridge went from being regarded as pests to being regarded as something we should be proud of. Restaurants actually started orienting their serving space so that people could watch the bats emerge. Okay? So that's what's happened. And doesn't it seem completely appropriate that in a place like Austin, where our slogan ought to be keep Austin weird and wild, not just keep Austin weird? Doesn't it seem like a place where bat-friendly mescal ought to just be flying off the shelves? So again, I have zero financial interest in this whole thing. Zero. I'm just a snake biologist who thinks bats are cool, and I would like to propagate this. So I really would like to convince you all to be my ambassadors in doing that. You know, convince some other Total Wine store to start carrying bat-friendly mescal. Kelly and I have been jamming on the idea of what if there was a special margarita made with mescal, and let's call it El Murciélago. That's bad in Spanish, okay? And so what if you went in the hippest Austin restaurant, and there on the drink menu was El Murciélago. And to be authentic, to be the authentic El Murciélago margarita, it has to be made with Don Mateo Cupriata, bat-friendly mescal, right? Now, we need a recipe. I think it's got to include agave nectar. And we were thinking, what if there was something you dusted the rim of the glass so that when you drink like this, you end up with pollen?
No, that's not going to work. People are not going to want to go to a bar and come out looking like what you have on your face. If they didn't walk in there with it.
Maybe you could offer 2 different versions, because I totally do that.
This is my friend Nikki, who's actually a bat fanatic and does bat education. So that's all I have to say. You wanted to do something else?
Can
Mary?
I say something about another reason why this is so cool?
Yeah.
Is that we have that bat, we have a nectar feeding bat in West Texas. Big Bend has the largest diversity of bats that any other national park. There's like 18 species of bats there. And one of them is this bat that feeds on the agave and migrates to Mexico and leaves those agave plants along its migratory pathway for its health. And PCI is trying to work with local ranchers and along that pathway to have them grow agave for them. But also, we have the largest concentration of bats in the world here at Bracken Cave outside of San Antonio, which PCI wanted to preserve to conserve. Wow.
Nikki, would you stand up for a second? So this is Nikki Lake. Nikki and I have been friends for years. We met at a Texas Parks and Wildlife, some kind of conference thing. Yeah, and she's a professional nature educator and also a bat fanatic. And she dresses up as a bat. And anyway, she's just a really cool person I've known all the time. So we're happy to answer questions. If you have a bat question, Nikki actually knows a lot. I know a lot about snakes.
Yeah, we thought that now we just, free-form questions anyone had, and then,
I know kind of similar to mescal is the sotol that's here, and I guess the plant is kind of similar to the agave. Bats also serve a function in
Yes, and in fact, there is a nature-friendly sotol made by a company in Dripping Springs, I think. Yeah, and Nicole, who's our biodiversity center person, she actually wrote a wonderful blog piece, which you can find through a biodiversity center that's about sotol, mescal, and okay, yeah. But thank you for mentioning that.
yeah, and whether or not it's bat pollinate, do you know, do bats pollinate the sotol plant?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I mean, yes, it's possible that they do some, but I just, from observation, it seems like they're mostly, insects covering that. So I'm guessing, some would be more during the day in its environment. But that's a great question because it's light colored, so exactly. Yeah.
This local Texas sotol distiller was at least giving a percentage of profits to pollinator charities, so to speak, here in Texas.
I'm familiar with that as well. So.
Yeah. Cool. That's
Other questions, don't be shy, yeah.
I was curious, so was this a hobby of yours before you decided to?
Like, how does, okay. Well, I come from a big Irish Catholic family, so drinking was like a thing. And it was really I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters, so a big kind of family. And my brothers were like, they were watching the American craft distilling world do this. And they're like, naively, we can do this, kind of thing. And it's a longer story that I don't really want to get into, but when it came to gin, I was like, I can find the juniper because, it's just a big nature hunt, right? To go find a unique species out there. And it meant I got to leave the city and camp. By the way, I now have land, I have 22 acres out there, but that just kind of happened. Just literally finished building a structure to kind of process areas out there. But for the first, I started R&D, I started looking for alligator juniper in 2014. So, and I would go and I'd camp. And so, there was, my cell phone doesn't work out there. And talk about a digital detox, like going out there and you can't, no one can bother you and all you can do is think. It's wonderful. So it was just basically an excuse to get the heck out of Dodge and do those kind of things. And then it just became this. So I really credit my brothers for wanting to do this. It would not have occurred to me. And I actually wasn't a bit, full disclosure, I was not a huge gin drinker before I started this crazy thing.
So you didn't have a few distilled, you didn't do the distilling?
Actually, that's kind of funny. So in the beginning, I was like, I did start playing with it. I'm a pyrophobic person, so I don't like things blowing up on me. And distill, it's illegal, by the way. I have to distill at home, and it's illegal. And it's a 6-gallon thing. But I've never been brave to fire it up, because you literally have to have a propane tank and this. So I have this part's legal. just saying, I have this little glass liter, what do they call it? Essential oil extraction. And so I have that at home. And honestly, in the early days, I was like, oh, why don't we make a non-alcoholic distilled spirit? And those are called hydrosols. So I actually have a whole suite of books on how to do that. So you could collect, when you make essential oils going one way, and the water part that's got the, distillate in it, fun botanicals is going the other. So I have been a mad scientist at home with these various things, but when it came to really making the gin recipe, I absolutely deferred to another version of a mad scientist, the master distiller. But there were certain botanicals I was like, no, I don't want lavender in my gin. There were certain big no's.
Thank you.
But I think we put together just a glorious set of recipes.
Where's the distiller based on?
He was out of, how many of you have heard of Corsair? It's out of Tennessee. That was a kid, and we stole him. We ordered him away. And he's wonderful. But yeah, so I mean, it was just kind of this love of nature and having some brothers who thought we could do this. And if anyone wants to, I can show you how to, you can message me and I can show you the kind of safer little still you can get it on. It's glass and it's cute. You put it on a little heater plate so nothing blows up. Any other mescalities?
Where do you do your production?
Thank you for asking that. We actually distill in San Antonio. We distill with Ranger Creek Distillery. We actually, for a while, were distilling with Desert Door.
Okay.
And they actually got they're a little bit almost too big. They're like, actually, we need more space. And so I'm distilling in San Antonio. Also with the set of Desert Door, the founders are veterans. And same thing at Ranger Creek. So really honorable gentlemen. Ranger Creek's down in San Antonio. And so we're contract distilling. So we do not have our own distillery. I mentioned before, being a kind of a cheap scientist, having your own distillery is very expensive. So I own the recipe, own the intellectual property, and do it that way, keeping us in the name. But if you ever, Ranger Creek does whiskey, they also do beers. They're kind of a full service situation. We do our gin, whiskey, and beer. Kelly, are you gonna make more gins? More gins? Oh, thank you for asking that. So actually, when we're richer and famouser, I might do a rose fruited one, and maybe all those proceeds would go 100% to the Nature Conservancy, that kind of, when we get to that stage. But the next product that we will be coming out with, and it's not clear exactly when, is a version of wild bark that's been aged in used bourbon barrels. And growing up I grew up in Wisconsin. I mentioned Irish Catholic, so we really like our old fashions. And aged gin is the smoothest Irish whiskey I've ever had with bourbon burn. And so it's not out yet, it'll look different. But yeah, the aged gin category is a super small niche market. It's not really.
Do you have a plan for where you're going to source your bourbon barrels from?
Right now they're being aged in Wisconsin, but are you do you have? It's a thing, it is hard to find.
I wish I were connected on that.
Yeah, no. I mean, it was a thing, trying to find the right barrels, trying to find, and there was a shortage for a while, it was crazy. And we actually aged it up in Wisconsin, not only because that's my very, very home state, but because the temperature is not so extreme, so you age something down here, and it's gone. And you need changes in temperature, and it just stays on. So what are we doing? Oh, sorry. So you are having, thank you. We've been, so you can find various cocktail recipes on our How to Drink You are having a West Texas spring water. So it's our kind of version of ranch water, but it's lighter. It's also, if you flip over to the backside of your tech sheet, it's one of the ones featured there. I think it's just light and lovely. You know, it's just something you can, it's dangerous. By the pool. Super, and again, it's something we believe you should be able to drink anything, these drinks at home without having to buy a bunch of fancy ingredients. The next thing we were going to serve you is to kind of, you know, revolutionize how you feel about gin. And you can really make so many different traditional cocktails with gin. So we're going to serve you a Texas mojito. All right, so it's a gin mojito. When you make a mojito but with gin instead of rum, it's officially called Southside. But I think it's just easier to call it a Texas mojito or a wild mojito. And so this is wild bark, simple syrup, lime juice, and leaves. I love a mojito, whether there's rum in it or wine, wild bark. I love a mojito. Yeah.
Is that your pup in the picture?
It is. That is Jake. Isn't he handsome?
Yeah.
Is this all second now? This is not my pup, but this was these are, well, she is passed. But they were soulmates. But yeah, this is Jade, you know, looking fondly at Shamrock.
Sure.
Yeah. And I have another wild forager named Baker. But yeah, and so, like, I have camped all over those Davis Mountains, and my mom is always worried about me camping still. Are you going to be safe? And I'm like, Mom, I've got 2 ginormous dogs that I'm going to
Don't worry about the jackals, they say.
Well, actually, that is. So after 8 or 9 years of just camping, I finally bought land out there. And the first night, yeah, we are being recorded, but we'll snip this out. I had put earnest money down, so I didn't officially own it, but the owner of the land lived in Houston. And I was like celebrating with my friends out there. I'm like, I'm going to go camp on my land. I own that land. And they're like, well, Mom, do you want a gun to protect yourself? Because they're all gun. And I fear guns, and so I'm like, oh, no. What nocturnal predator is, I'm going to use light to protect me. Because what, you know, card-carrying nocturnal predator would ever go to his light, right? So I get out with Jason, and it's a 5-acre plot, and we park on one end, and it's near midnight, and it was a new moon. There was no moon. It's really dark. In fact, where I forage is an internationally recognized dark skies reserve because I can see from my land as the crow flies. I see the McDonald's in Sept. It is. I've been a lot of places, thankfully, because of my day job being a biologist, and that night sky out there is my favorite night sky on this planet. It is phenomenal. So, anyways, it's a new moon, super dark. And I've got my headlamp on, I got my lantern, I got my dog, and I'm like, and like all my gear, my tent. And I'm like, bop, 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 bop. I get to the end, because of course where I want to camp is not where I parked. And I get in front of this meadow, and the first thing I see, basically from here to behind Becca, the wall over there, 2 big green eyes. And one thing I noticed is that human eyes, our eyes are actually kind of close to each other. Predator eyes are not. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, well, no reason to turn around at this point, right? So I'm like, just kind of looking at this thing. And we must have been upwind because my dog, Jake, did not do anything crazy. And I'm like, just what? And it's like looking at me. And it's so dark, I can't see his shape. But I know he's a predator because he's down by the, you know, it's like wolf stage. Probably a mountain lion. And so I see him or her looking at me, and then like looking away, and then looking back. Okay, so I decide to set up my tent, like chronically, like putting my tent up while watching these eyes, get myself and my dog in there. We did not pee that entire day. And by morning, when I was still alive, I'm like, okay, I've been blessed by the goddess mountain lion in the area. So it must be okay. And that's the only encounter with the mountain lion that I'm aware of that I've had out there.
Wow.
I felt pretty good the next day. I was pretty nervous that night. Actually, my there's some wonderful people out there, and he was convinced he had seen the lens with a giant lens. I don't know. It's, our land is at 6,500 feet. So it's wonderfully, it's cool, literally, and figuratively, yeah. All right, so now you're gonna have, are you mixing up the mojito now?
Yep.
This mojito, yeah. How many feel drunk or just feel kind of like good? So I mentioned earlier that I'm a chemical phobic person, and you're going to benefit from this. Because not only do I forage these junipers from incredibly pristine areas, but I'm the one, you're looking at wild gins and ladies here. Me, who doesn't get paid, and Sam, who does. And I'm the one who, Sam does everything, and I order the botanicals and I forage. So that means when I'm buying the other botanicals, every time there's an option, I'm buying the organic ones. Because pesticides are so not good for the environment, and they're so not good for your brain, as well as the rest of your body. So there are people out there who drink more of my gin than I do, and a few of them call me up the next day like, Molly, I had 4 martinis last night with your gin, and I do not have a hangover. I am convinced if you use clean ingredients, you're not going to get those hangovers. So anyhow, just drink more of our gin and get it.
So I know gins always have a mix of botanicals and everything. Is your mix of botanicals a proprietary secret?
No, in fact, if you've got a tech sheet on the front side that shows the bottle, we tell you exactly what's in it. Thank you so much for bringing that up, because you notice we have descriptors for each of our gins. Our Bark is our West Texas Dry, so it's a Texas version of a London Dry. And when you hear that descriptor, it's referring to being very juniper forward, which means there's very few botanicals. We only have 5 botanicals, 2 of which are juniper. We use the common juniper in both of our gins because someday we want to take over the world of gin, and to sell it in Europe, you literally have to have common juniper. If we just said Texas juniper, then we wouldn't be able to sell it as a gin in the UK. And we plan to be the Tito's of gin someday, only better quality stuff. More Texified, I should say. And so when you hear the word Western style, which is what our wild June is, it's not because it comes from West Texas, it's because Western style refers to not being dry and juniper forward and usually having a bigger bouquet of botanicals. So if you've heard of the botanists, they have 31 botanicals in there. How many of you have heard of Monkey 47? It's actually a pretty darn good gin. It comes out of Germany. And that 47 refers to 47 botanicals. Personally, I think that's a bit much. Like, are you really going to be able to detect the 45th from the 46th? We have 11 botanicals in this Wild June. I often refer to Wild June as my gateway gin because she's so different. Like, I don't know if when you first tried her, I forgot to kind of stop and ask people, but she doesn't really hit you with that kind of like, oh, so ginny flavor. And so folks who quote say, oh, I really don't like gin, I often try them on Wild June.
You say, yet.
Yes, exactly. They were just waiting for the best to show up, and here we did. But yeah, it's been, now I'm a huge gin fan, I'm a huge wild gins fan. But yeah, honestly, I did not drink that much gin before starting this whole. Yeah.
I want to hear more about the rewilding from Dr. Gary. So the question that I have would be around, what do you think the barrier to that is? Is it the, ranchers shooting these animals when they come onto the land? Is it the population of the species? Is it a mixture of both? What are the barriers to rewilding Texas?
So we could talk about jaguars because that would be probably the most difficult. And the fact that Texas is almost entirely private land ownership, with a very strong private landowner kind of ethos.
Right.
I know what I'm talking about. I think it's going to have to happen within that context. So that's the first thing, is that I think people like me interested in bringing jaguars back need to treat local landowners with a certain amount of respect and sort of try to understand their side of things a little better. So just to give you a tiny side story, I studied rattlesnakes most of my career. I love rattlesnakes. That's just what I work on as a scientist. And most people like me are pretty contemptuous of people that just kill every snake they see. Well, for the last 5 years, I've lived a lot of the time on a ranch where you're always sticking your hand under something, you're preoccupied, you're not hearing the snake biologist who can spot a bushmaster out of his periphery and nobody else can. You're actually not attending to venomous snakes. So that's just one tiny example. I have a lot more sympathy than I used to for the danger of snake bite to somebody actually working in a rural context. But I think we need to have a little bit more of a respectful two-way thing, especially as we get out west. And then the second thing is I think we need to be looking at ways that people could actually profit from, or at least not lose money being engaged with jaguar conservation. So to me it's quite ironic that right now in northern Mexico, there's an effort underway to produce jaguar-friendly beef. So you would actually buy steaks in stores. If they came from those ranches in Sonora and Chihuahua that are favorite jaguar presents, the meat would actually have a jaguar-friendly seal on it and pay a little bit more for it, okay? In Brazil, right now, in the Pantanal, there are experiments being done with a heritage breed type of cattle called pantaneros, which look a lot like short-legged longhorns. It turns out that jaguars in Brazil want nothing to do with these pantanero cattle. So they're finding out experimentally in Brazil that jaguars faced with the choice of going after these hornless, what are they called, Kelly? Nelore, which is the most widespread type of beef, or one of these pantaneros. The jaguars aren't stupid. They're really smart. So they go for the hornless Nelore. So that brings me back to, okay, if your stretch goals to have jaguars, you got to do something about keeping horns on cattle. And you ask, why do we take them off? Well, it's supposedly for safety, but I think it's really so they pack as many into a trailer as possible. Then you ask, well, why are we sending all the cattle to Kansas to be slaughtered? Why aren't those dollars staying in the hands of local ranchers? Why isn't all that petroleum being used? You see where I'm going with this? I mean, there ought to be a way to shift the fact that a lot of us are going to keep eating meat. Keep eating meat that's healthier, by the way. So longhorn meat is almost as lean as bison. It's extremely tasty, in my opinion. And blah, blah, blah. You can see where I'm going. I think you just have to start with this goal and ask, well, what would it look like to have jaguars back in Texas? And then you start working towards the present. Instead of starting out and saying, well, I'd like to truck in a bunch of jaguars tomorrow.
To that last statement, it looked like when you showed your map where the jaguars are in Mexico, it sounded like you were saying that there needs to probably be a corridor that allows them to come up into like Big Bend rather than trucking somebody and dumping them in the park.
Yes, and I'm in touch with one person in particular who's the major Mexican jaguar conservation biologist. And he thinks that we're actually more likely to have jaguars back in Texas than we are to get into the breeding population in Arizona. We're all interested right now. I just want to say one more thing about that. In Arizona and Mexico, it's all adversarial. So the whole thing about getting jaguars back in the U.S. in Mexico and Arizona is about suing the Fish and Wildlife Service, forcing them into the U.S., making local ranchers do that. It's fascinating to me that that's the way we're doing it right now in the U.S. And right across the board, they're talking about raising jaguar-friendly beef. And in Brazil, I left out ecotourism. Ecotourism for jaguars is a huge thing in Brazil. So in Brazil, there's ecotourism, a kind of cattle that can be raised that jaguars won't mess with, and protesting the jaguars. And here we are, we're in the fight. So,
That's such a good point, like, people in the US pay all these dollars to go see these mega predators in other places, and we could have them right here.
We've got exotic wildlife farms, why not add a jaguar to the mix?
no, we actually had
What about, I mean, this is kind of a charged question, but the border wall and wildlife corridors,
jaguars eat feral hogs?
I think almost certainly they would. So,
That would be a pretty good way to sell it, right?
Totally, yeah.
Jaguar is it's a pretty interesting cat because it turns out in places where jaguars and pumas go occur, pumas actually tend to eat bigger prey in terms of the actual mass of the prey items. There's some exceptions. Really big South American jaguars, which are a lot bigger than North American jaguars, they sometimes even kill tapirs. But North American jaguars, which tend to be only about 150 pounds, something like that, they eat armadillos, they eat peccaries, they eat tortoises, they eat alligators and caiman. I found a folklore reference to Comanche mentioned in the 18th century of seeing a panther, so it's a translation of Comanche, a spotted panther eating an alligator in East Texas. That has to be a jaguar.
Yeah.
It has to be a jaguar.
You had mentioned cutting off the horns, and farmers don't necessarily want to do that. What is the benefit of that?
Of cutting them off?
Yeah.
Well, the two things that get mentioned are safety, and certainly horns on cattle horns are weapons. And so, and when they talk about safety, there's safety to humans and there's safety to other cattle. So, like if you have two bulls and they have horns, they will poke each other and occasionally injure each other. If you have cattle with horns, depending on how you manage your cattle and whether or not your cattle sort of have tendencies to be aggressive toward people, then they can be dangerous to people too. The longhorns we have come from ranches where they've never encouraged aggressive behavior or bred. And so our longhorns are very easy to be around as long as you're respectful of the fact that they have these. So I think the transport is really the thing. It's just not in mind that you could stuff a lot more cattle into a trailer if they don't have horns. But I'm telling you, if you're around cattle with horns, especially longhorns, it's amazing. They just do everything. They scratch their butts. They manipulate food. They play tricks on their owners. Like we have these rain gauges that it's like this big cylinder that fits into these two tight-fitting like plastic grooves. And the only way you can lift out that rain gauge is to push directly from below and push straight up for about a foot. The only other way you can get it off would just be to brutally destroy the rain gauge. And twice now we've come, and there's a rain gauge on the ground. And the first time we've been vandalized. And then you realize nobody vandalizes that little parts of Texas. And it has to be one of our longhorns. It's just kind of messing with me, I think. I think it has to be a longhorn. When you're around, you find out they're extremely aware just exactly where it is. Not to go on. We're going to talk about there are, so I don't actually know who owns this dog. But,
I think you do now.
well, I was thinking about that. Won't it bust when I go out the door? I think there are about a dozen bottles of this in the store. I think it's by the bottle back. And if you typically use a different Total Wine store, I'd really appreciate if you go in and have a restaurant.
Do you know how much they're asking for the dogs here?
I know exactly how much. It's $63. And the other chain that I won't mention the name of was getting $82 for the same bottle. So I'm so fond of Total Wine.
I said, so am I.
Yeah.
I've been very supportive of the small spirit producer out of Texas. Total Wine was one of the first retailers that brought us in. And they're like the chamber, supposed to happen. Grateful for them. It took us a while. So there's certain chains where like they're not as friendly when they report to be pro-Texas. Little, yeah.
What's your favorite gin cocktail?
While I answer that, because it's going to be long-winded, does anyone need another mule? Because we cut you off on that. Okay, so I'm going to walk around. Everybody's like, so you just tell me how you want. Okay, great. Just add one ice in each cup. Yeah, that'd be great. So
Because our gins have different personalities.
Oh, you can go right here.
If you're selling mules.
I was so, could we literally go through all those? Okay, all right, so.
So, hold on. So could we just say you're being served ice by another UT Austin biologist? As Kelly's a good guy. She's an expert on frogs.
Yes, and there's other UT biology professors in the room. Oh, there's the cats right here. You want to tell them what you're a professor of?
I'm a paleobiologist, mostly working on lizards, but small mammals as well, reptiles, and
Yes, she's awesome. She just came up for tenure, and this badass is, I can't quote. We know what's going to happen. And then the newest member of our department is in the back, Dr. Becca Young. Becca's worked with me on some stuff, but you want to tell them everything you do?
I study how genes get turned on and turned off to make animals look and behave and function differently.
Yeah. So are we doing mules? Yeah, we are doing mules. I'll come around and pour what I'm allowed to pour, which is this, and we're getting you more of that fever tree.
Would it be possible to just get a small pour of both gin?
Of course, yeah, and if you want to try them side to side again, ours is a lot cheaper than the mescal, so we have no problem.